Welcome to Soft Apocalypse Bar Prep, and I'm Kimber, your host. Today, what I want to talk to you about is IRAC and outlining. Now, I know you guys are thinking, I went to law school, I learned about IRAC in my first year legal writing course. I know everything there is to know about IRAC. My writing is chef's kiss, everything is dope. Well, I can assure you, you are wrong. And the reason that I know this is because I've been grading your essays, folks, and I know what's going on. So, today I really want to talk to you about IRAC with respect to the bar exam because it actually is slightly different than what you're accustomed to when you are sitting for a law school exam. Now, here's the main problem a lot of folks have when they're studying for the bar exam, and I don't know that a lot of people actually understand that there's a real paradigm shift between law school exams and bar exam essays. Now, you might theoretically, conceptually grasp that there's a difference, but there's a real fundamental difference. And here's the thing, it's really about the difference between in law school, where you have a grader who actually has discretion to grade as he wants or she wants, whereas on the bar exam, there really is no discretion, or at least we're led to believe there's no discretion, that there is some sort of a rubric. People have to follow a certain way of grading, and there's things that the bar examiners are looking for, and if you don't have them, you're just not getting those points. So what I call the law school mentality is write as much as you possibly can. Take everything that you can. Throw the kitchen sink at it. Everybody and their moms is involved in this bar exam, in this law school essay. We're putting everything in there. We're throwing it all in there. And we're not only going to write what's relevant to the question, we're also going to bring up a bunch of irrelevant rules of law that we remembered. We're also going to throw in some kind of an allusion to a joke that a professor made on the day when everybody else canceled and did not come because they were working on a legal writing assignment, but your con law prof made some kind of a joke and he said, guess what? The three of you who are here, I'm going to give you extra points if you remember that I said this thing 2 months later on your law school essay. I'm going to throw some points at you. That's typically the kind of mindset that you have. More is more. And usually that totally actually is not a bad strategy. Typically, what you'll find is that the people that write the most in the shortest amount of time, the fastest typists, the people who attended every class and remembered everything the professor said and were able to throw all those little inside jokes in there, they're the ones that tend to get the better scores. Now, with respect to the bar exam, it's totally different. You will actually find that the more you write, sometimes the lower your score is. And this has been uh, people are befuddled at this. People are perplexed and wonder why is it that I wrote an entire treatise on con law and yet I only got a 2 or a 3 out of 6 potential points that I could get, or however your state does the grading. And typically the reason is because you spent so much time throwing in the rules of law that you never actually answered the question. So with respect to a bar exam essay, you really want to adopt a hit it and quit it approach. Get in, get out. Succinct, concise. Less is definitely more. You are not getting extra points for demonstrating that you can write a complete treatise on torts, or that you're throwing in case law names, or that you're throwing in stuff from the second restatement, or from some obscure article that you read. And believe me, I have seen it. I have seen people cite case law in a torts essay. I have seen people try to write a complete treatise on torts law. Regardless, what you do not want to do is spend so much time writing out this elaborate rule statement and then have very little time to actually address the meat of the question, which is the analysis section. And I think part of the problem with the more is more approach to bar prep is that you get so involved in this black letter law. And we know that the bar exam is not a test of what it's like to be a real lawyer, because being a lawyer is open book. We know this. You would never be expected off the top of your head to know the case law, to know the relevant rules of law, maybe with the exception being, civil procedure. Yes, you are going to be expected to know those rules and things like that. If you're in a courtroom, you better know the rules of evidence. You better know civil procedure. You better have that sorted. But you can look it up if you're not convinced or if you're not sure. Nobody's expecting you to do this from memory. So I think a lot of people taking the bar exam get all wound up and like, black letter law, must know all the rules of law. when in fact that is just one component of what an answer is. What the bar exam allegedly tests, because who knows at this point, but the premise, the underlying premise of the bar exam is that they're trying to see that you can demonstrate your ability to think like a lawyer. And how does one do this? It's not by vomiting out rules of law, because any robot can do that. Anybody with a commercial outline in 2 months can vomit out some rules of law, whether they understand them or not. The issue is, can you apply that rule to the relevant facts in an analysis that is fact-rich, that is well supported and persuasive? They want you to show that you can think like a lawyer. So when we're talking about IRAC, it's not just enough to the R in rule doesn't just mean I vomit up everything I can remember about my torts class or my contracts class. It means I need the one rule or the rules, depending on how the question is structured. I need just those things that relate to this particular fact pattern. Let's just think about it the way that a regular lawyer would. If you had a client walk into your law office and they said, hey, I've got a situation, I got hit by a car and I want to know if I have some kind of a case, can I recover? And you say, well, let's talk about Mrs. Palsgraf and the time that the thing fell on her, and then there's this other case where somebody pulled a chair out, and I'm going to spend 42 minutes talking to you about the history of how the law of torts was derived. And they're like, yeah, but at this point they've walked out. They're going to find somebody who literally says, yeah, sounds like you might have a case, and I'll take your case. The client doesn't care. They don't give a crap what the rules of law are. They just want to know if you're going to be able to help them. So you have to look at the bar exam as if each time you get a question, you're trying to help somebody solve a problem, and you're not just regurgitating the entire body of law that this particular question is testing you. So when we're talking about bar essays, this is why outlining is so important. And I think most people really are not outlining the way that they should be, if they're outlining at all. And I know that a lot of you are not outlining, because I see these stream of consciousness, jazz, funk odysseys, where people, they start coming in like, with a little bit of law, and then they start re-reciting all the facts, and then they start remembering, oh, here's another rule of law, and I'm going to give you a mini conclusion, and then there's a bunch of conclusory statements, and then maybe I remember another rule, and it's just like, it's all over the place. And maybe if this was a Fish concert or something, that would be totally great, and we would all be grooving. But when it comes to the law, we need structure. We need to have it organized, and your grader needs to be able to follow your logic. Remember, your grader is really only going to be spending no more than 5 minutes. And I know people get very upset when they hear this, and it's probably different for California. Maybe they get 10 minutes. But for the most part, because there's thousands of essays, or at the very least hundreds of essays being graded, and there really aren't as many people grading these essays as you think. It's really not a huge, it's not like every lawyer Wonder Twins activates and suddenly they have the power to grade your essays. It's not a lot of people that do this. They do not have time to wade through your answer to try and pluck stuff out. They're looking for an ability to just read check, to go through and say, rule, okay, yeah, got that. Like, did they mention these key facts? Yeah. Did they support this? Did they get the right conclusion? Yeah, okay, got it, move on. That's literally what they're doing. You have to make their job as easy as it possibly can be. Now, I'm not saying that if you write this epic poem, if you basically write Beowulf, that you won't get full points. You very well could. However, it's going to take them longer to get through that, and an angry grader is not a happy grader. A happy grader is somebody who can literally go through and say, oh, they articulated the issue beautifully, they gave me just the rule that I needed, and they moved on, and now we can all move on with our lives. That's really what is going on here. So when we're talking about outlining, I do not mean just sketch a few facts in, write some questions in there, and just sort of like write your stream of consciousness reaction to what you're seeing. That is not the mindset. You have to get very mechanical. And yes, it's tedious. Yes, it's boring. With the exception of the MPT, you are not graded on the quality of your writing. Now, I'm going to say that one more time so everybody in the back can hear me. With the exception of your MPT, you are not graded on the quality of your writing. And I know that as a as a gunner, as a high achiever, as the type A personalities that we are, we really think that the most eloquently, the most beautifully wrought language that we can prefer to the bar examiners, the more they're going to love us. But honestly, they do not care. They do not care. You get 0 points for the quality of your writing. They don't really even care about typos. They don't really care about misspellings and things like that. They're not really grammar Nazis or anything like that. I mean, you obviously don't want to have a plethora of big mistakes. You don't want to get party names wrong and things like that. But for the most part, they don't really care about how your language looks or how it flows or whatever. They really just want, did you get the issue right? Did you get the right rule of law? Did you mostly articulate the rule of law in the way that it was written? That's what they're really looking for. So you can just kind of, and I know it's hard to unlearn all of the legal writing. And remember, we might have spent weeks and months writing our first memo, when in fact and in practice, a memo is literally, you type memo and you write a bunch of stuff. It doesn't have the same format. It doesn't follow any kind of rules or structure necessarily, because people are just tippity typing away. So what I want you to focus on when you are constructing your outline and when you're working on your essays is not to worry so much about writing as much as you can, writing as beautifully as you can, making sure that it reads like some kind of final draft of a legal writing exercise. It's just not in your best interest to do that, because you're not getting any points for it. Now, the caveat being, and I do see this a lot, I see a lot of people, sometimes you'll get party names mixed up, or you'll misuse a term of art. You want to make sure, if you're using legal terms of art, that you understand how to use them and you understand how to spell them. Case in point, quit claim deed, Quit claim deed. I see a lot of people calling it a quick claim deed, and I also see a lot of people not understanding what it even means. So if you're using a legal term of art, make sure that you are getting it right, that you're spelling it right, that you're applying it correctly, and that you're not using it in a way that does not suit the relevant issue at hand. Most of you will have been taught IRAC or IRAC, maybe even CRAC. For the most part, most states, especially UBE states, IRAC is the format that you want to follow. And we all know that's issue, rule, analysis, conclusion. And some people say argument instead of analysis. It's the same thing. But that is the basic bones that you're supposed to hang your answer on every time. Do people do this every time? They do not. I see students, even within a couple weeks of the bar exam, not writing issue statements at all. For example, what they will do instead of writing an issue statement is they'll just recite the question from the answer prompt. They'll literally just repeat the question. That is not an issue statement. You should not be asking questions on the bar exam unless that is a format. And I know California has its own thing. They've got their own stuff going on. This is of general relevance. This is for people who are taking a UBE based kind of MEE style essay where you are doing IRAC or possibly CIRAC if that's what you love. But I mean, there's no benefit really to adding your conclusion twice. Nobody cares. I mean, it might make you feel good, but it's really a waste of time. And when you have 30 minutes to write an essay, every second counts, and you need to be making sure that you're spending the bulk of your time fleshing out your analysis section, not just 15 minutes of just writing out a rule statement. That is not beneficial to you. So issue statements is literally whether the blah 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 is yada yada. Seriously. So let's talk about, here's an example that I like to use in torts. So here's the fact pattern. Little boy, 5 years old, walking down a deserted country road by a ramshackle fence. On the fence is a sign. He can't read it, but the sign says no trespassing, stay away. Within the paddock, he sees a big, exciting tree with a ramshackle old treehouse. And the treehouse is built in an avocado tree. His favorite food in the world is guacamole, and he would love his mom to make him some guacamole when he comes home. So he's got a plan. He's going to go over that fence. He's going to go up the ramshackle ladder into the ramshackle treehouse, climb onto the roof, go out and get the juiciest, tastiest avocados. He does this, immediately falls to the ground, breaks his arm. No guacamole, Everybody's sad. Does his family have a case? Now, when you see a fact pattern like this, you should immediately be thinking about all of the relevant issues from these facts. Now, whenever you see a fact pattern, every fact in there is important. And I'm going to say this again because I think a lot of people don't realize this because they think the bar examiners are trying to trick them with respect to these essay prompts. They are not. The MBE? Oh yeah, they're here to trick you, to trap you, to get you to go off into the wrong analytical path. They basically want you to fail. That's why they give you so many sexy choices that you know are wrong, but they're so sexy, you really want to choose it. The MEE is not like that. They do not put facts in there to distract you. Now the MPT, oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. There is case law that's distracting. There are things and facts that are distractors that you have to wade through. But the MEE is the one place on the bar exam where you can actually trust that you have all the material in the fact pattern that you're going to need to make your argument. And I'm going to say that again because I think a lot of people don't get this. The MEE gives you all the facts that you need to make the arguments you need to make. If you find yourself saying, the facts don't show bloody blue, but if we had these facts, then yada yada. No. If you are adding your facts, and I'll never forget my first year contracts teacher always said, Miss Russell, don't fight the facts. Don't fight the facts. And I understand now more than ever what that means. You have to use the facts that you have. You can't add other facts. If you're an attorney, your client comes in and tells you the story, you can't say, but what if you didn't get hit by a car? What if you got hit by a bus? What if a plane landed on your head? That's not relevant. It doesn't matter. Do not add facts. Do not make assumptions. Do not try to fall in love with an argument that you want to make and then see that you cannot support it factually. We're going to talk about this more when we get to the analysis section, but that's what I want you to do. Trust the facts, rely on the facts, and stick to just the facts presented. And that's going to help you come up with your issues. So back to that fact pattern that I was talking about with the little boy and the tree house, you should already be thinking, oh, okay, we got a little kid, we've got a tree house, we're in torch land, faux show. And we're most likely looking at some kind of an attractive nuisance, ramshackle, super sexy treehouse, avocados. Ooh, yes, so sexy. We've got a sign. He can't read it. Okay, so what's going to be the age for a person, or the reasonable person standard? What's the reasonable child standard? What are the expectations there? You should be immediately thinking these things. So when you're going through your fact pattern, I want you to be thinking carefully. Every single fact. Why is it here? Why is the little boy's age important? Why did they mention that he can't read? Why is there a sign? Does that mean that there's a trespass issue that we might be talking about? Is that a defense? Like, you should be thinking about, well, what are the family's arguments? What are the potential defenses? How can you neutralize those defenses? Can the kid still win? What's going on here? You should always be thinking about all of these things. So what I want you to do when you're going through the fact pattern for the first time, I do not want you to do anything but read it. Literally, read it and ask yourself these questions. Treat your mind like a Sherlock Holmes mind palace and envision the facts and just Socratically ask yourself, why is this fact here? Why do I care that the boy is 5? Why do I care that he likes guacamole? Is this relevant? Why is this here? All of these things are what you need to be thinking about when you go back to do your second read. Now, the second time that you read it, you will have the question in your mind. And typically for the type of fact pattern that I just related to you, you might have several types of prompts. You might have the dreaded explain, which everybody hates the explain prompts because they don't really give you an idea of what you're supposed to be doing. And that's kind of the time where you're looking at all of the potential arguments that the plaintiff can make, any potential defenses that could be brought up, and all the ways that you would neutralize those defenses so your plaintiff can still get the damages that they're owed. You might get a prompt that says, the boy's parents come to you and ask if he has a claim. Based on negligence, is there a claim? Like, they might actually pinpoint it to that. But typically you'll get some kind of more vague prompt, and that's where you really have to be very, very careful in how you structure your answer. And that's why when you go back to the second read, that's when you're going to go and highlight. Now, for those of you taking a remote bar exam, and we know that you're not using any kind of tangible medium to make your notes or outlines, this is when you're going to have to start using your virtual scrap paper, and you're going to have your split screen up. And when we're starting to do our second read, that's when you're going to go in and you can highlight. Now, we know this is true for New York. We're assuming that, or I'm hoping and praying, that you will be able to use the highlight function and the cut and paste function from your answer. It's possible you won't be able to use cut and paste. You might at least be able to highlight. So that's where I would go through the second read, and that's where I would highlight just the facts that I think are relevant to the arguments that I'm planning to make. So again, do not highlight the whole thing. Do not highlight entire blocks of text. You should literally be highlighting in the example that I gave: the boy's age, he can't read, what's on the sign, treehouse, ramshackle, like whatever qualifiers are going to help you make your argument. That's all you need to be doing. You do not need to highlight much more than that. So once you've spent two times going through that, and again, in a 30-minute MEE answer session, you have 10 to 15 minutes to do this complete outline, and I want you to spend the full 10 to 15 minutes. Do not, and I repeat, do not race through and immediately start typing whatever you can remember about everything about torts, instead of stopping and really thinking about what rules do you really need to be addressing. Do not rush to vomit things. The worst, and this kills me that it still happens on the bar exam, because it's so triggering to me for 1L, when we would sit in our very first, and I remember it clearly because my very first exam in law school was our civil procedure, and people had barely had enough time to read the first question, and suddenly it's like plague of hornets and wasps and every kind of thing on the world. Like there's a stampeding elephants. Everybody's typing away. What are you writing? What are you writing? You don't have time to have actually absorbed that. So do not immediately start writing when you get into your essay. You should not be typing anything until you've at least spent 5 to 7 minutes reading and rereading and highlighting and getting a good idea of what's going on. You need to do the analysis in your head before you can move to your outline, before you can then finish fleshing out your final answer. So take the full 10 to 15 minutes. And I know some people are faster readers, some people are slower readers. You can spend 15 minutes reading and outlining and still have plenty of time to flesh out, because I'm going to tell you the technique to use that's going to help you manage your time better. So during the first 10 to 15 minutes, when we're doing our outline, we've spent maybe 5 to 7 minutes just reading and rereading, understanding the content, understanding the call of the question, knowing what arguments we're going to have to make. Now we're going to move into our outline. Now you have virtual scrap paper, and typically when I tell people how to practice for their final bar exam, I tell them to use this anyway. So you should have experience working in a Word document anyway. So the split screen shouldn't really be a problem for you at this point. So this is the one thing that you should already have been doing natively. You should have already been doing your outlines in your answer section, or at least in a separate Word document, so that you can then transfer it back into your answer section and move on with our lives as we all wish we could. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to identify what the issue is. So in my mind, in that example that I said before, the issue here is whether the treehouse constitutes an attractive nuisance. That is how I want you to construct your issue statements. The issue here is whether blank. Now, an issue statement is not another opportunity for you to write most of your rule. The rule statement is where you write your rule. And I see a lot of people getting confused where they'll put a whole bunch of the rule or they'll put too many irrelevant facts into their issue statement. Keep it short and sweet, succinct, concise every time, and always use that transitional phrase. The issue here is whether. I do not want you asking a question. I do not want you writing 52 introductory headings like torts, intentional torts, negligence, blah, 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 blah. No one cares. Don't do it. You're not getting points. Any heading that is not your issue statement, I don't want to see it. I'm going to cross it out. If I grade your essay, it's getting crossed out, and all the time that you spent coming up with these headings was a waste of your time. Do not waste time on headings. Do not waste time coming up with your own weird numbering system. A lot of people will do this where you actually have 3 questions and they decide, I'm going to not use numbers. I'm going to have one huge block of text. Or I've decided I'm going to be fancy and use nothing but Roman numerals. Don't do that. Stick to the numbering convention that they give you. And if there's 3 questions, give them 3 answers. Don't try and squidge it all into one. Make your grader's life as easy as possible, because then it's not hard for them to dig out all the points, and you're gonna get a better score likely. Especially if I'm the one grading it, because I don't want to dig through all that crap. It really ruins my day. So your issue statement, and you always need an issue statement every single time. It's not a question. It's not just a little sketch. It's a full issue statement. The issue here is whether blah, blah, blah. Every single time. And what I want you to do before you even start writing your answer, I want you to do the full IRAC with all of the transitional statements that I'm going to give you right here. So literally, don't just put IRAC in your answer. Put the issue here is whether, another paragraph, the rule here is, and that could be the rule or rules here are. In this case, that's your transition into your analysis section, and therefore, that's your transition into your conclusion. You should be able to do 4 paragraphs, and you do have enough characters. And again, we know in ExamSoft, they count spaces as characters as well, which is another reason why you don't want to go off crazy, half-cocked, using a million different headings, because that's using up characters. You also don't want to put 2 spaces after a period, even though I know those of us who were on a journal, it drives us crazy not to do 2 spaces after a period. It just boggles the mind, but you don't need to do that. 1 space after a period is totally fine. But I want you to use those phrases and get into the habit before you go through and start reading of doing that outline. The issue here is whether, the rule here is, in this case, therefore. Not only is this going to keep you on track, it's going to prevent you from forgetting to put things in. One thing I see so often is people think they've answered the question, but they maybe didn't put the full rule in, or they came up with some kind of a conclusory statement and thought that they had done a full analysis, but they never got around to doing it. So you really need to keep yourself on track by making sure that you have all of those phrases to kind of like give you that little nudge that you need to move on. So in your issue section, literally all I want is that one issue. I don't want multiple issues. If you are, and this happens a lot on the bar exam, that one question will have multiple sub-issues within one question. So you might have 3 macro questions and then little mini questions under those. So you might have a 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B. This is very true when it comes to torts. You might have 3 sub-questions within one question because you have 3 separate parties. It's very true with civil procedure because you might have to talk about, subject matter jurisdiction, and then you've got diversity, federal questions, supplemental, all of that stuff, and that could be like 1A, 1B, 1C. This happens a lot. So make sure that you are keeping things straight, and if there are multiple sub-questions within a question, that you are numbering them accordingly so that can trigger for your grader that you've moved on. But you have to IRAC each subsection. But again, you don't have to rack your brain. You know exactly what to do. The issue here is whether. The rule here is, in this case, therefore, move on with your life and go forth and be lawyers. So let's talk about the rule statement. This is where everybody gets into trouble. And not because they don't know the rule necessarily, but because they know too much. So much. I want to tell you a story about a guy that I coached back in the day. And this was when in Illinois, you were actually able to come to a site the after the bar exam results were out, unsuccessful candidates could come and they could compare what they wrote with the sample high scoring answers to see what they did wrong. Now this cat was law review. He was brilliant, amazing writer, had done a great job throughout bar prep. We had no clue. This guy failed so hard. I don't think I've ever seen somebody fail harder. Like, it wasn't just like a couple points, it was like 30 points. And the reason was, as was quickly revealed to me when I looked at his answer, I just looked at it. It was beautifully written. It read like a treatise. It read like the second restatement, and he had case names in there. He had the restatements in there. He had all this stuff in there, and it was beautiful. It looked like a law review article. I mean, everything about it was fantastic, except for the fact that he never answered the question. He didn't answer any of the questions because he spent so much time just going into like all the sexy jazz funk odyssey spinal tap, kind of like at the fair sort of thing, where it was like a 45-minute like trombone solo or something. And nobody cared. Like, he got as many points as he could get for the rules, but he basically was just making conclusory statements. Like, he didn't have time to do the analysis, so he was just doing conclusory statements. He was like, here's everything you need to know about torts. Also, it's not a attractive nuisance. But he never applied the law to the facts. He never made a persuasive argument. He spent so much, sometimes he couldn't even complete the answers because he spent like 20 minutes writing everything he could remember about torts, and he never answered the rest of the question. I don't want this to happen to you. And this guy like was kicking himself, but he couldn't figure out what he had done wrong until I said, dude, in each one of these questions, you just never answered the question. Like, he's like, but I thought that just having this black letter law was all I needed. No, no, no. And that's why people get so freaked out about the bar exam, because they're like, I don't know the law, I don't know the law, I don't know the rules, I don't know the rules. Well, that's why we tell people, if you don't know the rule, make it up. Because they're not really testing you necessarily on your ability to vomit up the rule. That is a big part of it. But if you look at how things are graded, you're maybe only getting 25% of your points from the rule. You're getting points for identifying the correct issues. You're getting points for arriving at the correct conclusion. And there usually is a correct conclusion because they spend a lot of time with their psychometricians and their people sitting in their dark, dank rooms coming up with these questions, and they seed it with certain facts that are going to lead you down one analytical path. If you're going down this path, it's because you're adding your own facts, you're not paying attention, you're ignoring facts. That's something that happens a lot of times too. People just like race through, ignore the facts, and start applying rules that are not relevant and are not coming to the conclusion that the bar examiners are expecting. So just know, while there's no one right answer to the bar exam, there's one preferred answer, because they're leading you in that way with the facts that they give you. And if you pay attention and you understand what the facts really are, you will always come to the conclusion that they really want you to come to. So that's why your conclusion doesn't really get you a lot of points. Usually it's minimal points, because the point of this whole thing, again, and it's very Wizard of Oz, the journey is the point. How you got there. It's like when you took math in high school, you could have the answer, but how many times did you get a quiz back? And nerds need not answer, because I know who you are too. But for a lot of us who thought we were slick because we were able to like find the answers or crib the answers from somebody else, you'd get your quiz back and it would say, show your work. And that's what we want on the bar exam. You must show your work. It's not enough for you to say the treehouse is an attractive nuisance, but why? Why? And that's why I say Wizard of Oz, because you should not be talking about a fact unless you're saying why it's relevant and why it's helping you and your case. The bulk of the points come from the analysis section. We're going to talk about that more when we get there, but I want to finish up with rules, because I think a lot of people think they need to spend so much time on the rules when in fact less is really more. Like, if it's a negligence question, duty, breach, causation, damages, and then just make sure that you are clear that you know what the standard of care is in this particular thing, that you know that you understand the distinction between actual causation and proximate causation, and that you're able to apply those things and make sure that you apply all of those elements correctly to the correct facts, and that you're not leaving any of these elements out, and that you're not leaving any of these facts out. If you're not addressing some of these facts, you're probably missing points. And again, you don't necessarily need to address every single thing that could potentially be happening. You can still get a passing score. The high passing scores are the ones where they see all the issues, they anticipate any potential defenses or objections, and then they overcome them. So you can still get a passing score by not addressing the defenses and things like that, or not defending or addressing the counter arguments. But that's the next level. So you don't necessarily have to be a super gunner and get every single thing. And I think that's another thing that people freak out about. Let's just be real for a minute, y'all. We see these sample answers. You see these sample answers and you're just like, how in the monkey's ass is it possible for one human being in a 30-minute span of time able to write what you see in these sample answers? Well, I'm just going to level with you guys and say right now, it is not possible, nor is it expected. It's not the expectation. Let's just be real. Like, who writes these sample answers? It's the people either who work for the National Conference of Bar Examiners, or it's the people who work for the bar prep companies. They have all year to write these things. They're not just spending 30 minutes on these things. Hell no, they would get fired if they did that. They're spending so much time making sure that everything is on point because they got to cover their butts. CYA is basically what a lot of these things are about. That's why when you get your bar prep materials, there's a lot of stuff in there about admin law and Fed tax and oil and gas rights, stuff that you wouldn't necessarily think you would need to know about. Oh, but it's in there because once upon a time, some bar prep company predicted that we wouldn't see any admin law because it hadn't been tested for 30 years. And then in 2017 or something in Illinois, they tested admin law for the first time and everybody lost their minds. So that is why these sample answers are so verbose. They're so meaty. They have so much of everything in there because they weren't written by one person, largely. They were written by a team of people. They were vetted. They were edited, vetted, and they did that multiple times. So please take a moment and woosah with me and just be mindful of the fact that you are not expected to give perfection. You're not expected to vomit out everything you could potentially vomit out. They're just looking for you to, it's sort of like when you see these recipes online, like 5 minutes versus 50 minutes versus 5 hours, right? I can make a really dope spaghetti sauce in 5 hours. Oh yeah. It's going to be rich and dark and have all kinds of wonderful notes and fruity flavors and just be so awesome. In 50 minutes, I can make a pretty good one. I mean, it's better than ragu. And in 5 minutes, yeah, I can take a can of Pomodoro tomatoes, crush them up, put in some basil, slop that on some pasta, and you'll be pretty happy too. So what I'm saying is the bar exam is a continuum. You don't have 5 hours. You don't even have 50 minutes for the most part. You basically have 5 minutes, literally, to figure out what the issues are. And they're not expecting perfection. So don't get hung up on trying to write these epic tone poems of rules where literally duty, breach, causation, damages, move on with your life. Literally. Less is more. Less is always more on the bar exam. And the main thing you need to worry about now, let's talk about the analysis. So we've talked about the rule. Hit it and quit it. We've talked about the issue. The issue here is whether. When it comes to analysis, this is probably where 40 to 50% of your points are going to be coming from, sometimes more, depending on how they set the rubric. But what I mean by this being the sort of the meat of your question is this is where you really demonstrate your ability to think like a lawyer. This is where you show that I saw the facts. The facts are what give rise to legal issues. It's the facts that give rise to the issues, right? So if I see this little boy walking down, I want to know, why is he a certain age? Why is that relevant? Here's where I'm going to tell you why it's relevant. Because there's the reasonable person standard, and then there's the reasonable child standard. Is it reasonable to expect a 5-year-old boy who can't read to not climb a fence and go after some avocados in a very sexy ramshackle treehouse? No, it is not reasonable. And most states do not have a 5-year-old reasonable child standard. Usually it's at least 7, right? So that's what we're talking about here. That's where everything comes together. This is where we put the tomatoes and the basil and everything together, and we start getting ready for the conclusion, which is when we serve the meal, right? So with the analysis, it needs to be fact rich. And what I mean by that is you're taking the rules and you're applying them to the relevant facts to reach the conclusion. And these need to be so full of facts, chock full of facts, as many facts as you can cram in there that are relevant. One thing I see a lot of people do, and usually it's a problem because then they end up running out of time, is they will spend another 10 minutes reciting every single fact that they transferred over from the fact pattern. Do not do this. Don't do it. They know what the facts are. They gave you the question. You don't need to recite every single fact. The only facts I want to see in your analysis are the relevant facts. That is the one and only time that you put facts in. Are they relevant? Otherwise, I don't care. Is it, if we're talking about the standard of care, then all I want to know are what facts go to that standard. Like, what standard of care does a landowner owe to potential trespassers? Because sometimes there is a duty of care to trespassers. There might be a duty to warn. There's definitely a duty if you're on notice that there's some kind of ramshackle building or an empty pool. It's always going to be a treehouse or a pool or an empty pool or a dark pool or a pond or something that a kid is like, what a great day. This is the best day of my life. I'm going to go jump in that pool. There's always something like that. And you have to understand how to apply the rule to come to your conclusion, right? So in your analysis section, and again, less is still more, with the caveat that I want you to be using as many facts as you can to support what you want to say. Now listen to me and heed my words. If you do not have facts to support what you want to argue, you are making the wrong argument. Okay, say it with me again. If you do not have the facts to support the argument that you want to make, you are not making the correct argument. Now, on the MBE, we will see that there are facts that will lead you to one of the wrong answers. That's the way that they've created the MBE. They always have these tricky little facts that will seduce you into choosing the wrong answer. That is not how the MEE works. They're not trying to trick you on the essay portion. They're not going to give you facts that can be interpreted 52 different ways. If you find yourself saying, we don't have facts to show this, but if we did, blah, bitty blue would be the case. You're not getting points for that. That's a waste of your time. You only want to argue the facts, you only want to apply the rule to the facts that are relevant and that are going to support your argument. And if they're not there, try again, because you're making the wrong arguments, okay? Don't try and put different, for the most part, you're not going to be applying different areas of law, even though in the real world, sure, various things are going to be all together. But on the bar exam, for the most part, you're only going to be tested on one subject. Now, again, it is possible, and we have seen where they've tested tort, civ, pro, and contracts like all in one question. It could happen. But when you're dealing with, most MEE questions are pretty straightforward. It's going to be just all torts all the time, and you just have to drill into, usually there'll be a section where you're dealing with causation. Usually there'll be a section where you're dealing with like standard of care, and then there'll be like a causation section or something like that. So be mindful of that and make sure that you are only applying the rule to the relevant facts, and you're not throwing a bunch of stuff in there that just does not need to be there. And don't worry about making fancy discursive sentences. You literally can say, what the issue here is whether the treehouse constitutes a An attractive nuisance, the rule here is an attractive nuisance is blah, 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 blah. In this case, the treehouse constitutes an attractive nuisance because fact, 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 fact. Therefore, the parents will be able to recover damages from the landowner because they failed to secure the property, blah, blah, blah. That's all you got to do. So that gives us a segue into the conclusion. Now, a lot of people, and you know who you are because you went to law school with me. And I distinctly remember sitting with you in the library in 1L looking at a practice contracts question that we were given before we had our first contracts exam. And I remember having this argument with you, many of you, who have this sort of Manichaean approach to the law, which is black and white. It's either right or wrong. There's a yes or a no. And I said, yeah, but there are multiple ways to look at this. And that is kind of the issue that a lot of people have with the bar exam, is because they want to approach the bar exam like me, like I did, which is like, yeah, but if this, or if this, and they wanted to argue both sides. Now, when it comes to your conclusion in a law school exam, typically the professors want you to argue both sides. They want you to say, okay, based on these facts, the likelihood is yada yada and such and such. However, if this were the case, if these facts were here, if this didn't happen, then this would be the result. Or maybe they're just arguing the other side. Like in law school, it's a benefit to you to argue both sides, but still ultimately come down on your own. You really don't want to do that on the bar exam. You do not want to argue both sides. You do not want to try and say, it looks like these facts support, but if they did this, then it wouldn't be. If they did that, then it wouldn't be. If we did the other thing, then it wouldn't be. You don't have time for that, and you're not getting points for that. There's really just one conclusion. Like I said, they're going to give you the facts that are going to lead you to one particular conclusion. So just kind of hit it and quit it. But make sure that you're not making a conclusory statement. So I just kind of want to wrap up here by sort of talking about the pitfalls of conclusory statements. What do I mean by conclusory statements? Well, a conclusory statement would be, the treehouse is an attractive nuisance. What does that tell me? It doesn't tell me why. It doesn't tell me how. It doesn't give me anything. Now, a non-conclusory conclusion would be the treehouse the landowner will be liable to the family of the boy for damages incurred when he fell from the treehouse because the treehouse was an attractive nuisance for these reasons. Like, that's what I'm talking about. If you find yourself just making statements that are very abrupt like that, like the treehouse is an attractive nuisance, the landlord is not responsible, like these statements mean nothing. They don't add anything. They don't get you points. You have to make sure when you're coming to a conclusion that you actually are fleshing it out and saying why. Because. I always want to see a because. If you don't have a because in there when you're analyzing things, you're not telling me why the facts are relevant. Like, some people will literally say something like, the boy is 7 years old, or the boy is 5 years old, or the treehouse is on a tree. Like, I don't care. Why is that relevant? Tell me. Do not assume, like, this is the thing. It's crazy because I've seen people write essays where they both write too much and too little at the same time. So they'll spend way too long writing these huge rule statements. They'll literally go all the way back to, like, and it happens a lot, especially if it's UCC versus common law, they'll go into the history of the UCC, the history of common law. They'll go back to frickin' ye olde England, Regina versus Blobbity Blue, and those stupid crankshaft cases that we all had to read. Like, they'll start doing all that crap, and then it's like, oh crap, I only have 5 minutes to complete this. The boy is 7, or he can't read, it's an attractive nuisance. And that's all they write. So this is the problem that people will have. So you want to write less in your rule statement and just stick to the relevant rule and get it as succinct and concise as you can. You want to expand out and zoom out your analysis section. Make sure every rule that you're applying to the facts, that you're saying why that fact is relevant and how the rule plays. Don't make any assumptions. It's so crazy to me that people feel like they have to re-recite all the facts that the bar examiners know because they wrote the question, but yet you make all kinds of assumptions. Like, you make these leaps. You'll make the leap to the conclusion without showing how you got there, and you're just never going to get a passing score when you do that. And I'm only here to help you get the most points that you can get. So, in closing, outlining is the key to your success. You have to do it. You can't ignore it. And I know there are people out there like, I don't have time to outline. I have to race. If I don't immediately vomit out all the law that I remember, I'm going to forget it. That is bunk. That is not true. You have been spending weeks and months, and in some cases up to 5 months, people have been preparing for this exam. There is no way that between the time you sit down to write the questions, suddenly you're going to forget everything you know about torts. That's baloney. That's baloney. So you need to stop, woosah, really think carefully about all of the facts that you've seen. Make sure that you're identifying the issues, and then write that clear issue statement, write that concise rule statement, write a very fact-rich with non-conclusory statements, fact-rich full statements that tell you why, because, why, because, and then your conclusion, which is full and non-conclusory, ironically enough. But you cannot skip this part, because it's the only way you're going to be able to manage your time. Now, many of you have not sat down for a full-length simulated essay exam, and you do freak out. And I know here's a few other tips that I want you to avoid on exam day for sure, but in general, don't look ahead to other questions. It'll just freak you out. Do not try and race through a question so you can save time for other questions. This is a bad strategy. You're never going to end up saving time. What you're going to end up doing is robbing yourself of the time to max out your points on every individual question. Spend fully each time you do a practice essay. If you're doing a full practice essay, spend the full 30 minutes on it every single time. And that means taking the full 10 to 15 minutes to read an outline and the next 10 to 20 minutes to flesh out. So when you're putting your outline together, you will spend 10 to 15 minutes sketching it all out. When you make your outline, the issue statement, full issue statement goes in there. Full rule statement goes in there. Full conclusion goes in there, because you should have an idea of what your conclusion is. And then for your analysis section, you're going to do bullet points. The key fact, why it's relevant. Key fact, why it's relevant. Key fact, why it's relevant. And that is what you will then transfer to your answer from your scrap paper to your answer section. And you now have up to 20 minutes to go in and flesh that out. So that is where you're spending your time. You can always add more things to your analysis section as you're going through. That's what you should be spending the bulk of your time on. So there's no reason not to be doing it. And one way that you can improve your score even further is every day you should be reading and outlining as many essays as you can, especially in the subjects that you are weaker. And I know you dread, everybody hates, well, there's some nerds who love it, but for those regular normal people who are just like, secure transaction sucks, commercial paper sucks, I hate wills, or I hate property. And I definitely was one of those people that definitely hates property. Do not put off the subjects that you're dreading. Instead, and I understand, believe me, I get it. I don't want to read your essays, and I know you don't want to write them. And I have to grade a lot more property essays. You only have to write the one. I have to grade all of them, and it sucks. So I get it. You dread it. You don't want to do it. But if you don't have the wherewithal or the emotional ability to face doing subjects that you hate, just read and outline them. Because the more that you read an outline, the more it's gonna become like second nature. The issue here is, the rule here is, in this case, therefore, pop in my stuff there. And again, like I say, full issue statement, full rule statement, bullet points of the relevant facts, and full conclusion every single time in your outline. Not a little sketch, not a little question, not a couple words, every single time. The full issue, full rule, full conclusion, and bullet points for the key facts for your analysis section every single time. This is going to help you manage your time. You're not going to forget anything. You're not going to forget to address any issues. And if in fact you do run out of time, you will still assuming that you've transferred it over from the scrap paper into your answer, which is what I would recommend you do after you make your outline. Transfer that whole thing over into your answer, and then flesh it out as much as you can. If you can't complete it to your own satisfaction, you'll at least get partial credit for what you are showing. That's why I want you to write full issue statement, full rule statement, and full conclusion, and the relevant facts every single time, because you probably will run out of time on one essay. It's just going to happen. Time management gets away from all of us, and weird stuff happens on the bar exam. All kinds of crazy stuff happens. You can't really necessarily predict how you're going to react or how things are going to go on the bar exam. That's why you have to have this sort of like second nature. That's why reading and outlining every single day really is fundamental. You have to practice it, especially with the stuff that you don't like, because here's the thing a lot of people don't necessarily know about the National Conference of Bar Examiners. And I think a lot of people know this now, but they tend to be pretty, I don't want to say lazy, but let's just say they like to use the same types of fact patterns over and over and over again because they've had some psychometrician tell them that this particular type of question can be easier to scale. It's easier for us to understand how to grade this. So they will test the same things the same way over and over and over again. And that's why it's very important for you to use this approach of doing the outlining, reading and outlining. I'm not saying you have to answer the full question, reading and outlining, and that can spend just the 15 minutes, no more than 15 minutes. If you start getting used to spending an hour reading and outlining, you're doing it wrong, because you're never going to have the ability to do that. So 10 to 15 minutes every day, at least 3 to 4 essays, and do it and do the same subject, because I want you to see the patterns, because you will find, and I didn't, I'm so sad that I didn't learn this until like 10 days, maybe not even 10 days, maybe 5 days before the bar exam, because I was like, you know what, there's no way in hell I'm going to learn commercial paper. I literally took secured transactions in anticipation of the bar exam, so I had a good idea how it worked. I did not take commercial paper. I did not understand it. I did not get it. I wasn't going to get it. And when I finally came to grips with the fact that I was never going to learn it or understand it, I had to come up with a coping mechanism to deal with that. And that's when I said, I'm just going to sit down for a couple hours and I'm going to read and outline every single commercial paper essay that I can in this given amount of time. Within about 2 hours of doing this, I started feeling like deja vu. Like, why do I feel like I just answered this question? Was it a reprint? What's going on here? And then I realized these lazy people, they test the same things the same types of way. They just kind of like have maybe 4 or 5, sometimes it's only 3 or 4 different types of questions that they just keep doing the same time over and over and over again. So in the areas where you don't feel confident and you can't write a full essay, that's where I want you reading and outlining these things so that you can find these patterns, because it's really going to help you immensely. But ultimately, you can't really succeed on the bar exam unless you read and outline, unless you're outlining thoroughly every single time, every single question. If you think you don't have time to do it, you do. If you don't want to do it, I mean, that's on you. But you're not going to get the scores that you need to get. And one of the issues that we're having with these remote bar exams is that they're testing fewer questions. In the past, you would have more of a buffer. In the past, when we would have a full 2-day exam where you had 100 MBE questions, you had 6 MEE questions, you could probably fail 1 or 2 of those questions outright if you had enough of a buffer set with your MBE. And we know this because that's just how it worked. You could, and I told this to everybody, all of my students, whether I was working in bar prep or coaching or doing whatever, I always told them, look, if you can get a buffer, if you can max out your MPT, which you should be able to do because it really is the one test of your ability to be a lawyer, which is why it's very important to practice these in full and understand every type of format that you could potentially see. When you normally would be doing a full length bar exam, the questions didn't have as much power. Now, a single question is much more more point heavy than it would normally have been, because a lot of these tests are only 1 day long now. You're maybe only doing a few essays here. So it's much more important that you really take every opportunity to max out your points. You can't slack off. You just don't have the ability. Plus, we know the likelihood is there's going to be some kind of technical snafu on the day. We don't know like what people's psychological well-being is going to be on the day. We don't know if there's going to be weather, further delays. We know it's going to be a craptacular thing that's happening. That's why you have to be able to just like immediately spring into action. You have to have some kind of robotic response that sort of takes over, that you can suppress the emotional and psychological impact and just robotically, the issue here is, the rule here is, in this case, therefore, every single time you should just be able to get Vulcan, not Klingon. This is what I'm going to end with. When it comes to the bar exam, you want to be a Vulcan, not a Klingon. And if you don't get it, I can't help you. That's just how it is. But I want to applaud you all. If you're watching this video, if you're still watching this video, I applaud you. If you have additional questions, please put them in the comments below. I'll be very happy to answer them. And if you are looking for additional coaching, reach out to me. You can reach me via Twitter. I will be happy to coach you for free because it's a pandemic, y'all. So stay safe, stay healthy, stay out of trouble, read an outline, and we'll see you next time here on Soft Apocalypse Bar Prep.